So, I think that we can now start with a sad remembrance to our friends and member of Forum Romanum, Ivan Bekyarev, who passed away, and we just sent him our best wishes at the last session of Forum Romanum while he was still living. Unfortunately, in the meantime, Serbia lost his patriarch as well. So we had a really very sad week. But we have to go on now. And I'm really very happy to announce the address of our friend, Andreas Serafim, who is, let's say, old friend of the University of Belgrade Faculty of Law. He was with us at least. Yes, it is. Andreas is not speaking Serbian, or maybe if you would like better, it can be Greek, maybe. Do you prefer Greek instead of Serbian?
Sorry?
You have to choose between Greek and English.
I can talk Greek, but then it will be all Greek to you.
Only a few of us. Right. Andreas was at the University of Belgrade, I think, a few times right now, and I expect him in the future. He has a great career. You can see that he is quite young. Really, not from my perspective, but he's objectively quite young, but with a great career up to now. His new position that he just got a month ago or a little bit more is assistant professor or research fellow at the Academy of Athens, which is one of the most prestigious institutions in the Greek scientific and academic area. So my first words are going to be congratulations to Andreas for the new post. It is really great pleasure to have you at that position. Before that, Andreas had great history. He graduated from the Department of Classics at his native University of Cyprus. And then he had great postgraduate studies at the Department of Classics at the University of Texas. And I think that you had a position of teaching assistant. It was with Professor Michael Gagarin, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's really the best possible place in the world to work and to learn from one of the really greatest scholars in ancient Greek law, like Professor Gagarin is. And then the crown of his career, the first part of his career, was his PhD at the University College of London. He was also teaching assistant there. He had a position at his University of Cyprus, but finally, now I think he settled in the great and very honorable chair of the Academy of Athens. It is great to have you as our guest this evening. Andreas is researching a lot of things, but one of his favorite topics is rhetoric, and this is the place where we are connected. As you know, it is also my favorite field, but in difference, I have only books in Serbian, but Andreas, although he is very young, has already a few books published by the very prestigious publishers in the world. The one was published by Routledge. It is Religious Discourse in Ethic, Oratory, and Politics. So you see, the title is Ethic Oratory, basically, and the issue is about religious discourse. So it is the Routledge edition. Then we have De Gruyter, also great editor in Europe, with the book titled The Rhetoric of Unity and Division in Ancient Literature. I'm really happy that I have the book that I can show to the people. It is something about, I think I showed it last time, Attic Oratory and Performers. And I think that performance will be our topic this evening. Then the book, The Ancient Art of Persuasion Across Genres and Topics. It is also a prestigious Brill edition. And the last that I know for is the Theatre of Justice, which is also Brill. Is that the edition that is going to be published, or it is already done?
It is already, yes.
It is. And also there is a new book which will be edited by Brill, also in charge of our friends Andreas Seraphim. So I'm really amazed, and I have to say that we are so flattered that Andreas is with us, and he is basically a member of Forum Romanum. Andreas, welcome. Your topic is so interesting, and I really hope that people are going to enjoy, and I give you a word. Thank you so much for coming. The floor is yours, and we are just ready to enjoy the time with you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sima, for these kind words. I have to say that having heard myself introduced, I can hardly wait to hear myself speak. It was a very kind invitation you sent to me, and it is my great pleasure and my great honor to be in the company of such a distinguished professor of legal studies as Sima is. You're very, very lucky to have him as professor at the University of Belgrade, indeed. Now, let me show you the PowerPoint presentation I prepared for you.
Perfect.
Can you see?
Yes, you can just start.
It's loading, but yes, we can see it.
Yes, we do.
And you can put it into the full screen mode so we don't see the interface.
Okay, let me just try to find where that is.
Well, somewhere in view, I think. This slideshow, yes, it will.
Slideshow, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I'm just going to mute everyone else so we don't have any interruptions.
Okay, great. So I have to say from the beginning that I would like this lecture to be as interactive as possible. And I would like to ask colleagues and students not to be shy to get into the discussion if they have something to say, if they want to say how great my analysis of passages is, or if you want to express disagreements. I have 3 reasons to be shy tonight. First is Sima, the second is Sima, and the third is Sima. Is such a great professor of legal studies. I have many reasons to be shy as a young scholar, so you don't have any reason to be shy when you're talking with me. So if you have anything to say, if you have an idea to share with all of us, please do get intervened into the lecture and tell us what you think about. And I would like to start with a question to you, my dear audience. You can see the title of this lecture, Killing with a Smile. And then you have the subtitle, Comic Invective, Public Forensic Speeches of Attic Oratory. Is there anything that punches your eye from the beginning? Is there anything you think it is interesting? Something that catches your eye in this title and the subtitle? Do you have anything to say about it? You are legal experts, so you need first of all to see, and then second to think, and then to say. So eyes, mind, and mouth. Is there anything interesting in this title? I don't want to use the term because you will find the answer, but is there anything that catches your eye from the beginning? Huh?
Well, there's one thing, but I'm not sure if that's what you meant. But the thing we all thought about was Professor Sima, because his nickname is Killer with a Smile. That's the name Voya gave him for how he is on exams. He's all very nice and smiley. Oh, honey, you didn't quite learn it so well. And the student doesn't quite realize that they failed the exam until they go out.
That's amazing. Amazing. Anything else? Next time I will give this lecture, I will start with your photo, Sima. Anything else about the title? Nina? Anyone else? Sima? There is something in this title and the subtitle of this paper which is at least interesting. I don't want to use that term in English because you will find the answer immediately.
I think Professor Sima is trying to speak, but he hasn't unmuted his microphone.
Oh, can you write to him somehow?
I think that most interesting word in the subtitle is invective. I'm not sure that many people understand complete meaning of the word invective.
I see. So take the first part of the title, killing with a smile.
Can I explain that?
There is somehow a contradiction in terms here. I mean, how can it be possible to kill with a smile on face? I mean, not even psychopaths and serial killers kill with a smile on face. And then you have the second part, comic invective, which is again paradoxical. This is the term I would like to, I wanted to avoid at the beginning when I asked you the question about the title. So you have two parts of this title which seem to be contradictory. There seems to be a contradiction in terms. Killing and then a smile, invective and then comicness in invective. How can this be possible? Now, take a deep breath because I will show you some scaring images. I didn't know about Sima, so I choose two different images. And you see killing with a smile. You have a big smile on this slide, but there is too much darkness. So how can killing in such darkness be, funny or humorous or comic or whatever? And take a deeper breath because the next slide is even more scaring. Killing with a smile, too much blood, too much darkness and too much blood on this image I have included in my PowerPoint presentation. So let us go and see, as Sima suggested, what is invective? Invective. You see two humorous ways of defining the notion of invective. You see two images that present invective, the notion of invective in somewhat a humorous and funny way, but in both images you can find a common term. What is that common term? Can you see? Violent. So invective is a violent accusation, denunciation, wordy abuse, fear. Second image, violent denunciation, accusation, harsh, censorious expression. So aggressiveness and violence are inherent characteristics of invective. I don't know if drivers in Belgrade are kind and patient, but it happens regularly in Greece and Cyprus. You have two guys having a car crash accident, Sima. They've got discussing and beat intensely between each other. And this verbal abuse, verbal invective, can end up in physical invective, punching someone on the face. So how can invective be comic at all? The main point this presentation would like to put forward is that invective can indeed become comic in the Attic law court, in the ancient Athenian law court, if we take invective to be a kind of performance. It's a shameless line of self-advertisement because I'm referring to my book. It is always good to say a few good things about your monographs, especially the first one. By the way, what we lost in this COVID nightmare period is the ability to go to the libraries and to go to our offices and take the books, put our hands on the books and feel the paper gently touching our hand back. And we can smell the book, we can see the book, we can see the colors on the book. So the next time you will be allowed to get to the premises of the University of Belgrade, stop by the office of Sima Avramovic and ask him to give you my book so that you can take the book on your hands and feel, as I said, the paper touch gently your hands. Now, in that book, I explain what performance is. Performance is the communication between, let's see what I have here. Between a performer and an audience, which is informed by the etiquette of a specific occasion and is based on the interactive communication, explicit or otherwise, between the transmitter of a message and its receiver. So you can see that there is, as I always say to my students, a triangle in the law court. You have on the top the speaker, okay, the performer, who sends a message to the audience. You have the second angle, and then you have the speaker who talks about and sometimes talks to his opponents. So you have a triangle in the law court. Now, invective can be seen as a sort of performance because you have an exercise of the power of A, the speaker and invective producer, over B, the adversary and invective receiver, before C, the audience. You have the same triangle. Please follow my reason here. Invective can be seen as performance because it is like having a script which is acted out by someone in the law court before an audience. So you have the triangle of communication, which is actually performance in the law court. How is it useful to say that invective is performance, and how that thought leads us to the idea that invective has comic affinities, has a comic dimension? If we see invective as performance, then we can say that invective resembles comic theatrical performance. Invective in the law court, and this is actually the main point of my lecture, invective in the law court has affinities, has similarities with comic theater, and especially, as you can see here, comic agon. There is a competition between two contestants held in the same trial, in which one is conceived as the antagonist and the other as the ironist who retaliates humorously. And this leads us to the technique of Aristophanes. There is a term we use in classics, onomastiko modin, which is the main characteristic of Aristophanes, when Aristophanes insults and ridicules a particular individual, trying to undermine him and make him the laughingstock of the audience. So you have the same qualities, and you can see that the reason here. So invective is performance, and taken as performance, it has affinities with the comic theatrical performances. So invective can become indeed comic in the law court because it has the dimension of comedy. It can also become comic because it provokes laughter. This is incongruity. As I have here on this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. Incongruity is when you have a set of expectations that are then juxtaposed with an unexpected conclusion. We are in Belgrade, and we know about a very famous Serbian actor of tragic performances. And we go to the theater together to see the performance. But when the actor gets into the theater and goes on stage, we find out that he's not that talented as he said he was. He's unable to say a few words to act out the theatrical performance, the tragic theatrical performance, and we start laughing at him, right? And what I would also like to tell you is that comic invective can be persuasive in the Athenian law court. Why? You can see on this picture 4 children laughing with one another at someone else. This is bullying, by the way. I will tell you about bullying. So whenever you laugh with someone, it means that you share assumptions and attitudes with that man or that woman or that group of people, and you isolate the target of ridicule from the group. This is the so-called social identity theory of Teufel and Turner, according to whom the activation of intergroup relations, so in-group solidarity and out-group hostility, have a huge impact upon behaviors and attitudes in target audiences. This is what happens in the law court. the speaker says a joke, a humorous story, and I will show you some passages in the rest of my lecture. So the speaker says a humorous joke, a humorous story. He creates a group to which he himself and the audience belong, and these people exclude the target of ridicule from the group. This is what happens with bullies and bullying. And by the way, one of the strongest messages that my lecture tonight would like to give is to keep bullying out of our classes and out of our society and out of our lives. We don't need bullies, we don't need bullying, so please do whatever it takes to keep bullying out of our lives. This is one of the most important messages beyond all the stuff about rhetoric and classics and Demosthenes and Aeschines that we would like to discuss tonight. Now, prepare this lecture, and indeed to prepare an article that I published with Hellenica, one of the most prestigious Greek journals that is published by Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, I had to read the entirety of public speeches. So 59 speeches in total. You can take a look at the slide of my PowerPoint presentation. These are the 10 Attic orators, and these are the stuff I read. Too many stuff, too many speeches indeed. I was reading all these speeches days and nights and long, very, very long nights, but no whining, no whining. I like the stuff, and you will like the stuff as well. So reading the whole corpus of Attic oratorical speeches, the public cases, I draw 4 conclusions I would like to share with you. First of all, comic invective is not placed at the very beginning or at the very end of speeches. So exordium and peroration are the 2 terms I use on this slide of my PowerPoint presentation. Why? Well, because it is risky to use such a risky technique as comic invective was at the start or at the end of your speech when you're trying to consolidate the goodwill, the eunoia of the audience. Is comic invective a weapon for the speaker against his adversary, or is it a risky technique? It is a bit of both. Comic invective can become risky if you give the impression to the audience that you cannot resist telling humorous jokes, humorous stories. Then, according to Aristotle in his Rhetoric, you can be taken as a buffoon, as a vomologos, this is the Greek term. So someone who cannot resist telling humorous jokes all the time. But if you are discussing sensitive material and sensitive cases, as for example, we are in 2B now, cases where there is sensitive personal and emotional involvement in murder cases, it is risky. It is a bit risky to use comic invective because you will give the impression that your opponent is not worthy of serious punishment from the judges. So you use comic invective very, very carefully. And this is actually the 3rd conclusion I draw. I read 59 speeches of Attic forensic oratory, the public cases, and I found instances of comic invective in only 12 speeches, so approximately 23%. This means that the speakers recognize comic invective as a powerful weapon in their hands to attack and undermine their opponent, but they used comic invective in a quite restrained way. Now, there are a few other conclusions, for example, that the legal character between the speeches, so defense and prosecution, does not seem to create any limitations. The difference between public and private stuff, though, is a different story, a very, very different story. We can discuss about that at the end of the lecture if you like. And there is another conclusion I draw, that comic invective is used in the parts of the speeches where the speaker wants to attack his opponent in personal terms whenever he refers to his failed profession, whenever he refers to his political matters, to any ambassadorial matters, and so on and so forth. Now it's the funny time. We will examine some stuff. This is a magnificent speech. I like this speech. Demosthenes is 18, and I particularly like this passage. It comes from section 262, and this is an example of incongruity. Why so? Demosthenes says that Aeschines, who was actor by profession, went to the theatrical stage to present tragic performance, but he was so failed an actor that the audience actually got angry at him and stoned him with figs, grapes, and olives that he collects like a fruit seller. So we can effectively see this very image, guys. The Razzie for the worst performance goes to Aeschines. Now, I have to tell you that at least one scholar, his name is Harvey Yunis, he's a very well-known professor of classics and Attic law, oratory as well, from Rice University in the States, disagrees with this analysis and suggests his own analysis. I will tell you about his analysis, and you will decide yourselves. We can have a voting at the end. If my analysis is more persuasive, or if Harvey Yunis' analysis is better. Now, I see in this passage that there is a great irony. Demosthenes says, "Oh, Aeschines, you think you are a successful actor. You are a failed one. You go to the theatrical stage and you have the audience so angry at you that the audience actually stone you with fruits and vegetables." Now, Harvey Yunis says that Aeschines was, of course, presented by Demosthenes as a failed actor, but because of that failure, Aeschines went to the fields and took fruits and vegetables from the fields himself. I don't like this way of reading this passage, to be honest, because if we follow the suggestion of Harvey Yunis, then the second part of the passage doesn't make any sense at all. Take a look at the words that I highlighted in the red letters. Agonon, ekonezeste, akon in Greek means both play but also fight. It is a military term, in other words. And then you have aspondos kai akeruktos polemos. So a war between the performer, Aeschines in this case, and the audience. And then you have traumata, wounds. This war gave wounds to the hapless actor. So if we accept the reading of Harvey Yunis that Aeschines went to the fields and took the figs, grapes, and olives himself, this second part doesn't make sense. But look how cunning Demosthenes really was. He wanted to use comic invective to make Aeschines a laughingstock of the audience, but he also uses comic invective to achieve another rhetorical end. Which one? Aeschines was boasting all the time that he was a patriot. He was someone who fought many fights to protect Athens. And Demosthenes was accused by Aeschines that he was a coward. He was someone who never fought a single fight against enemies to protect Athens. And Demosthenes comes with this passage and says, you think you are a patriot, dear Aeschines, but you are not. The only fight you fought in your life is the fight against the angry theatrical audiences. So you see how comic invective is used for very serious political reasons in the law court. It is not a simple matter to use comic invective. If you are as skillful as Demosthenes was at the time he wrote his speech on the crown, the speech 18, then you can use comic invective to hit several targets at once. Okay? If you like my analysis, or if you like the analysis of Harvey Yunis, anyone who wants to disagree is more free to express his or her disagreement. There's another interesting passage I would like to discuss with you. I do also love this passage. I do love all the passages of Attic Oratory. So anyway, you can see the text here and the translation. What is interesting about this passage is that Aeschines now presents Demosthenes like someone who wants to have wings and fly away from a difficult situation had created for Athens with his anti-Macedonian policies. Now, the interesting part of this text is this verb here, anaptesomai. I want to have wings and fly away. Now, I found out, and I suggest in my article, that this verb reminds us of the escape songs or the escape odes in Greek tragedy. These escape songs are attributed to women more than to men, as indeed in Euripides is Hippolytus, Andromache, and Hecumba, and Sophocles is women of. But think how Aeschines, how masterfully Aeschines uses comic invective here. He tries to change gender expectations. He puts into the mouth of Demosthenes utterances that are more appropriate for women in tragedy. So in a sense, he makes Demosthenes, his opponent, a woman. This idea can indeed provoke laughter in the law court. And we can effectively see this very Demosthenes, the Birdman. So these passages indeed are clear in provoking laughter to the audience. And at the same time, Demosthenes is presented as an effeminate man. You can think how serious it was to be presented as an effeminate man in an audience that consisted exclusively of males, of male Athenians, who paid high attention to the quality of being a man, of being able to participate in fights. You can see how masterfully Aeschines uses comic invective in this passage. And two more passages, one from Demosthenes' speech 19, this is on the false embassy speech, and from Aeschines' 3 speech, this is against Ctesiphon's speech, where we can find out that both speakers use stock comic characters, and especially the flatterer. What is the Greek word for flatterer? Kolax. So you have Demosthenes and Aeschines present each other like being in the theater and phoning upon, flattering the enemies of Athens, and the audience, the Athenian audiences started expressing their disagreement against both of them. This can become comic indeed, but it is important for us, this is what I'm trying to do in my article, to explain why the presentation of Demosthenes and Aeschines as flatterers in these two passages is connected with comedy and how it works. In a sense, by presenting each other as being flatterers of the enemies, Demosthenes and Aeschines try to invite the audience in the law court to imitate the reaction of the past audiences and express disagreements with each another. This is a very clever strategy. And one of the most important points this paper would like to put forward is that, yes, invective can become comic, but there is no laughing matter at all. Comic invective can indeed be very, very serious at times. And you have another passage, one of my favorite ones, from Demosthenes is on the Crown, speech 18. This is the Quack doctor. Demosthenes presents Aeschines like a doctor who, while the patient was alive, refused to give him the remedy. But when the patient died, the doctor explained how the dead man could indeed have escaped death. Imagine you have such a professor, such a doctor in these crazy COVID-19 times. Tragedy, nightmare. So the idea, and you can see Frank here, who started to get a funny feeling that his doctor was a quack. The idea that someone has worthy qualities that he does not have is very close to the comic character of Aladzon, the braggart, and bragging, according to our ancient sources from Plato, Xenophon, Aristotle, and so on and so forth, provokes laughter. Toiloion is the Greek term. So this is a very short presentation, as you may understand, the bibliography list. I can provide you with this a new volume, Comic Invective in Ancient Greek and Roman Oratory, which is about to published by De Gruyter, Trends in Classics, in early 2021. And here you can see my article in Hellenica. I can give you a piece of, I can give you a PDF file of that article if you like to elaborate on the topic of comic invective. What I would like to say as a few words in conclusion of this presentation is that comic invective can indeed be used to hit several targets in the law court. It is comic, yes, you can laugh, but even laughter is an act of aggression. There is too much darkness. Imagine the face of Professor Avramovich preparing the test for you. So there is indeed some sort of comicness in invective that is used in the law court, but even this comic invective can indeed become very serious in hitting several targets at once, and it can indeed be very fatal. Imagine, for example, the law court audience thinking that Demosthenes is an effeminate man. Nightmare to be in the theater, in the law court, and having so many people, including the judges and the onlookers, laughing at you for that reason. Imagine Aeschines accused by Demosthenes that he's a failed actor and that he never fought a single fight to protect Athens. A nightmare. It was a nightmare for him to be in the law court and to have the judges and the onlookers think that he's not a patriot, he's a fake patriot. Okay? So invective can indeed be very, very serious matter. And that's the end. Thank you for your attention, and you are now able to clap us, as my friend here says. Thank you very much indeed. So, any questions you may have, and I am particularly interested in discussing with you the idea I have presented about the paper, the passage of Demosthenes, this passage here, for which I have a strong disagreement with the analysis of Harvey Eunice. Anything you want to say, please feel free to ask any questions you may have, and feel free to say how great my analysis is, but also feel free to say if you disagree with my analysis. I always learn from people who express disagreements and are willing to have discussions with me. Yes, don't be shy.
Profesor opet pričate bez mikrofona. Professor Avramovich is trying to speak, but
The microphone again.
he just... Yes?
No, I'm not going to ask any question or to comment. I will leave the place for the students, but I really have a temptation to say that I really enjoyed your presentation. It is so modern, so, I would say, dedicated to the young people, and the issues that you're raising are absolutely very, very scholarly in the same time as it is a kind of entertainment for the students. So as this kind of combinations that you made is really great. I have some questions for you later on, but let's give the floor to the students first.
Of course. come on, don't be shy. As I said, I have many more reasons to be shy tonight. So you don't have to be shy. Express yourself freely.
So please, if you want to ask something, just turn on your microphone. Don't make the same mistake like Professor did a minute ago. And if you can't speak for some reason, you can type questions or comments in the chat like Gina did twice during the lecture, so we can look at the chat. And if someone is embarrassed about their English, you can ask in Serbian and we'll translate. And while the people are thinking, I'm going to take the opportunity for just a brief comment and a brief question. The comment is that, yes, I agree with your interpretation of this passage. I'm afraid my Greek is very rusty, so I can't say that it's based on my own interpretation, but given the translation and the explanations you've given us, really the second part wouldn't make any sense. I can't think of a version where he was actually just collecting figs and olives, where the conflict and the trauma or injuries would make any sense. And the question is, you have now really given us examples of the comic invective used in very serious cases. But since you haven't given us all the cases where you found it, were there, let's say, less serious, smaller cases where it was used without such a high degree of paradox?
Well, yes, there are. That's a very clever question, Nina. There are several cases where the use of comic invective may not have the seriousness it has in public cases. And especially, we can find a few such cases in private speeches, which is not part of my examination for today's lecture and for the paper I prepared for Hellenica. I remember, for example, I think it was in speech 54, the speech against Conon of Demosthenes. So Demosthenes is 54 against Conon, where Conon is presented as mimicking a crow, a bird. And I explain in my article, which will be included in the volume on comic invective, that to present someone at his 50s, because Demosthenes says many times in his speech 54 against Conon that Conon was about 50 years old. Okay, to present someone at his 50s mimicking a cow is very funny, humorous. But even in this case, where scholars said that comic invective does not have any serious dimension, I do argue in my article that it has a very serious dimension. Demosthenes presents Conon like being not able to control, not able to put himself in discipline. And that's very devastating when you are in a private case and you want to have someone be presented as a man who cannot, who cannot be in self-discipline. So someone who is able to do whatever it takes, even against your enemies, even against you or against your relatives. So even in this case, I think there are many scholars arguing that comic invective in Demosthenes' speech 54 against Conon is simply, a laughing, or and it is not serious. It is not serious at all. In my article, I do argue that it is a very serious moment of using comic invective. So in general, Nina, I will say that whenever we're in the law court, we do have many reasons to change comic invective into a serious attack, a serious means of attacking someone. We are never using comic invective just for the sake of fun. You don't want, the judges and the law court onlookers to laugh at someone. without having any strategic purpose, not simply to make him a laughingstock of the audience, but also to undermine his prestige and his public authority. So, attacking someone's character is a very serious matter. You can use many references, but you can also use comic invective. It has more effectiveness, if I can put it in this way. It has more effectiveness on the audience. But it is not a laughing matter. Comic invective can indeed be simply funny.
I just felt a little.
Sorry?
You please go on. I'm just apologizing. I have to leave for a moment. Please go on without.
I would like to say, finishing my answer to the question, the very good question of Nina, that comic invective can indeed be funny without any serious dimension, only in the theater, when you want the audience to laugh and be relaxed and so on and so forth. When you are in the law court, you have to use comic invective only for serious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Anything you want to say? A line of disagreement, perhaps? Please feel free to ask. To see students asking questions.
Oh.
So I presentation was persuasive. If Sima is trying to say something, like I cannot hear him, by the way.
Okay. Oh, that's right. I'm here. Yeah. Of course that you're persuasive enough, but I think that people don't have a lot of information and that they now are trying to find not only the argumentation, but to understand the main line of your thoughts. But I can really confirm that it is a very persuasive explanation that you gave. And I have, in the meantime, a kind of question for you. Speaking about the attacking of the character, it is basically the common point of all speeches in Athenian courts, both private and political speeches. So this is something that we can meet here and in all other cases. It is all packed within the, let's say, great package of performance. You are really a great expert in performance, in rhetoric, in Antiquity. And that's why I wanted to ask you, do you have maybe some kind of feeling what are in common and what are differences between public and, let's say, strictly private speeches in Athens, considering performance and, of course, considering invectiveness?
That's a very, very clever question, Sima, indeed. And it shows how much you know Attic oratory. Now, it was a daunting and excruciating question. Whenever I was at conferences, someone asked me that very question. Is there any difference between the techniques used for making comic invective in public and in private cases? And I had no answer to offer. Now, I do have an answer to offer because I decided to investigate the topic. This is my contribution to the comic volume on comic invective in oratory, both Greek and Roman oratory, which will be published by Integroider, as I said. And I have 2 points to make. First, techniques, so the patterns of comic invective are pretty much the same. We do, for example, have incongruity, as in this passage of Demosthenes. We do have the change of tragic patterns into comic ones. We do have the use of stock comic character. We do have the use of references to effeminate men. We do also have vivid descriptions like this one, or perhaps also like this one in Aeschines' speech 3. So the patterns are pretty much the same. What changes drastically is the frequency. This is the second point I'd like to make, and the way of using them. I said at the beginning that the use of comic invective in public speeches is rare. I read 59 speeches and I found instances of comic invective in only 12, so approximately 23% of the whole corpus of Attic forensic speeches. Now, this frequency is even more rare, is even rarer in speeches. I read how many private speeches? I think it was 51 speeches that I read, and I only found instances of comic invective in 3 or 4 speeches. I remember Demosthenes' speech 36. I remember Demosthenes' speech 45. Demosthenes' 54. And perhaps also Lysias' speech 1. And perhaps also Aeschines' speech 8. So I found instances of comic invective in 5 out of 51 private speeches. So the frequency changes, and also the way of using comic invective changes. I mean, you have this magnificent description here of how Demosthenes wanted to have wings and flying away. You have this magnificent description here of how the audience got enraged at Demosthenes because he was a failed actor and stoned him with fruits and vegetables. But you don't have this clarity in private cases. And this is because I believe, and I argue in my chapter, that private cases were mostly about personal matters. You don't want to have your judges, the judges in a trial, laugh at your opponent whenever you have many personal, not simply political, but personal, sensitive personal matters to discuss in those trials. So yes, the frequency changes, the way changes, but not the patterns that are used for comic invective. That's a very good question. I'm very happy that I can give an answer to that question. Is it a satisfactory answer, Sima?
Completely. Absolutely. Great. Thank you.
Anything else?
We seem to have a question in chat.
Yes.
A long question in chat from Dina. I'm going to read it out just in case not everyone can see it. So Gina says, I must thank you for a very interesting lecture and tell how deeply satisfied I was that somebody from the sphere of law science raised the question of how the beauty of metaphors can have a palliative function, even on the court, not only for the entertainment. I myself wish to enhance how art and linguistics and law are intertwined in the future. Metaphors are indeed dangerous, and in the hand of a clever mind, they can be a powerful weapon. Sorry for my kid. So thank you. And the question, how do you think looked the preparation of the speeches? Did orators have some kind of model they looked up to, or was it simply a talent? Did they use local linguistic idioms?
Well, talent is always, a good incentive for getting into the law court and giving speeches, but there are several ways of getting that talent if you don't have it from your own nature. In fact, we know that Demosthenes was accused by many people in Athens that he had notes given to him by very talented teachers of oratory, like Lysias. Lysias was a teacher of Demosthenes, according to the tradition, to be able to present a speech in the law court. Demosthenes was not talented, according to Dinacus and according to Aeschines, to give a speech in the law court. So he prepared notes and he memorized those notes. So I think answering the question, I have to say it is a bit of both. It is a bit of talent. It is a bit of experience as well. It is also a bit of preparation and technique. And we know, of course, that they were speechwriters in Athens, people who were capable of collecting data and presenting data in a very comprehensive manner, and prepared speeches that were given to their clients. Who was the most important? The first speechwriter was Antiphon, and perhaps the most important speechwriter was Lysias. who was not an Athenian himself, so he didn't have the rights, the political rights to get into the court himself, and he prepared speeches to be given to other people, to his clients. So yes, it is a bit of both, actually, both experience and talent, and of course, a sort of technique, rhetorical technique in speech writing and speech presenting, because it is one thing to have the script, as Demosthenes was allegedly having a script always to memorize, and it's a completely different thing to go into the court and present that script in a persuasive way. It's like having, a politician, okay, coming to the University of Belgrade to give a lecture, and you can see him reading the stuff like, he has the, I don't have any notes here, but I have a book. I'm actually trying to find out how imperatives are used in Attic forensic speeches, and I prepared notes covering a whole book. And you have someone, a politician, who has his book, his notes, and reading those notes without even having an eye contact with the audience. That's bad. Okay, so it's one thing to have a script, to have a speech, but it's a completely different thing to have the skills to get out to the people in the assembly, in the law court, in funerals, in Olympic Games, deliver that speech. And this matter, again, both of talent and of experience that is been given to someone by some practice. So by rhetorical technique. That's a very good question. I would like to thank the student for asking this clever question indeed. So you have many talented students at the University of Belgrade, Sima and Nina, and you have to be very proud of your students.
Yes, we are.
I am.
As great teachers as well.
Some question.
Yes, but Nicola had a question first. I'm sorry, but he applied 10 minutes ago. So Nicola is not a student. He is an artist. He's a movie director, and we hire him to record the forums sessions, normally live with cameras. His talent is a bit wasted on the WebEx session, but he also likes our subjects. So he has a question. Nicola, go ahead. And Isidora, you are next.
It's an astounding lecture. I was going to ask you in a very broad stroke about how would you classify the values and the terrain of this verbal conflict in ancient Athens and in Greek culture. But since I've been introduced this specifically, I may as well be direct and ask you, how would you, if a screenplay writer was to use this form of a verbal conflict in a script, how would you advise them to write this verbal conflict and how to apply it faithfully, historically speaking?
Can you repeat the question again, because I lost a few parts of it?
All right. If a screenplay writer was writing a story that involved this form of verbal conflict in ancient Athens or Greece, how would you advise them? What guidelines would you broadly give them to be historically accurate?
That's a very challenging and intriguing question indeed. Well, I am not as skillful as Demosthenes or Lysias or even Antiphon were in giving instructions, but I did actually gave such an exercise to my students at the University of Cyprus, asking them to prepare a speech defending the value of Greek Cypriot breakfast. It was a funny sort of debate the students have between each other. Well, I think it is important to bear in mind two things. First of all, your audience. You are going to approach a specific audience. So you need to know your audience very, very well. in order to find the right ways of approaching any matter without alienating the audience. If I am going to say something which is offensive for an American audience, when I'm giving a talk in the United States, if I am going to say about Donald Trump being a personification of comic invectiveness in the American politics, some members of the audience may stand up and say, go away, we don't want to listen to your lecture. So first of all, you need to know the audience very, very well. This is one of the most important prerequisites of writing any piece of oratory indeed. And the second is to have the knowledge to use words in the right way. If you write in your own language, you are in a position to use terms in a very effective way. So you need to know how to provoke laughter by using the right words in the right place. This is the term of keros, the right thing at the right place, at the right time, that Aristotle suggests in the Rhetoric. So these are the two general sort of advice, pieces of advice I can give you. But it depends also on the specific occasion. I mean, am I writing for a trial? Am I writing for an assembly of people? Am I writing for a political campaign where I would like to smear my opponent and undermine him and make him the laughingstock of the audience? It depends on the occasion. So there are many actually reasons.
Are there maybe some very specific Athenian ancient do's and don'ts that the modern audience would find exotic and non-intuitive that you can tell us about?
Well, one of the don'ts is the use of emotion. Aristotle advises speakers not to use emotions excessively in their speeches. But in fact, speakers did actually use emotions excessively in many different ways. I mean, I am preparing the article I told you about imperatives, and I found many instances of using imperatives to stir up the emotions of the audience. The speaker says, "Voithisate, help me. I'm poor. I will be destroyed if you punish me. My children will be destroyed." Now, according to Aristotle, this is not the right way of approaching the matter, because it is out of the case. It doesn't have any relation to the topic you're discussing. But in fact, that was a great way of approaching the audience, of trying to influence the verdict of the judges. So there are two levels of answering the question here. The first one is the theory. We do have theory in several writings of Aristotle, and the other one is practice. So one of the don'ts is the use of emotions, as I said. But in practice, many speakers, indeed all the speakers in classical Athens, used emotions to communicate with the audience more effectively. And there are many other do's and don'ts in speech writing in Athens, but again, it is only in the level of theory. In practice, it is the opposite that happens. I mean, for example, again, Aristotle in Rhetoric says that the speakers should not use comic invective because it is vulgar. It is a very, very risky way of approaching the audience. But in fact, many speakers, even in public, even in private cases, used comic invective.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for these two clever questions. And I'm very impressed that someone who is not a classicist or is not a legal expert has so many clever questions to ask. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, Isidora is next, and then we'll have a question from Ivana Verkatic. So Isidora, go ahead. Maybe we could see you. Wonderful.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. You've talked about comic invective in speeches, but I'm wondering what other unusual oratory means were used in court to attack and defeat the other side?
one of the most usual is character assassination, as I said before. The speakers wanted to present their opponents as not being able to put themselves into discipline. They present them as not being patriots, as having fought no fights to protect Athens, as not being males, as not having the virtue of the fighter and the spirit of the male Athenian who always wanted to protect Athens. So character assassination, this is always a technique that the speakers even nowadays use. I mean, think politicians. They use character assassination to undermine each other. They also use many references to the personal, especially the sexual life of people. I mean, you will read many accusations in the histories of Thucydides for the ways in which Alcibiades uses his beauty, because he was a handsome man, to create problems in Athens. So there are several techniques that relate to the character as well as to other aspects of the personal life of people in Athens. And what strikes me the most, and this is the next phase my research will get into, is that the Athenians thought that they had the freedom, the level of freedom necessary to talk about spicy issues. This connects with the question of my friend before. It is endowed here today in public speaking to use attacks against the personal life of people, right? But the Athenians had the freedom to make spicy allegations for the sexual life of their opponents in ancient Greece. And my question, which is my question to myself first and my question to other people second, is where's the limit? Where was the limit? Was there any limit in making references to the sexual life and the personal life of people in antiquity? I don't know if Sima or Nina investigated this issue, but for me, this is one of the most intriguing issues I have next to investigate, Isidora, and this is one of the important issues that many students can write a master's thesis or even a dissertation on. Think about it yourself.
Thank you very much.
I'm really interested in knowing if you have any ideas about that. Was there any limit to invective in antiquity?
Well, I'm not sure, but it seems like there wasn't.
I do have the same impression, but how can you get into the law court or even the assembly and say bad things about the mother or the father of someone else, of your opponent? I was shocked when I found out. I agree. When I found out in the speech of Demosthenes, in one of the speeches of Demosthenes, that he accused the mother of Aeschines of being a prostitute. Can you imagine a politician getting into an assembly and saying the same thing today? They will be destroyed at the same time he says so. But that was acceptable in Athens. How can that be acceptable? That is indeed a very interesting issue. It has to do with the codes of honor and decency in antiquity, and this will be a conference that will be organized at the Academy of Athens, hopefully in early 2022, on that particular issue. And I would like to see Isidora, Nina, Sima, and all the other friends from Belgrade joining us at the Academy of Athens to discuss this issue. It will be indeed my great pleasure.
And the next question we have that Ivana posed in the chat, though she sent it just to me privately, is very related to this issue. She is asking what are the limits of the comic invective. So she asked me before you said this. She asks, she's our PhD student, so she asks, how does it affect someone's honor, time, and can the comic invective be a means of committing hubris?
You see, I anticipated the question a little bit, It's a very clever question. Who's the student asking this question, Nina?
So her name is Ivana Velkatic. Maybe her camera doesn't work. I don't know. She's our PhD student. She's working on her PhD thesis with Professor Sima.
Perfect. So Sima, you need to support this student because she is indeed very, very, very clever indeed. Well, I do actually have the same question. And I asked many times myself to find out a satisfactory answer to this question. The truth is that I am trying to figure out different ways of answering this question, but I was not successful at all. So I think there is much to think about comic invective. And there is also much to think about the limits of honor and decency in Athens. Because, as I said, I was really shocked when I found out in a speech, one of the most important speeches of Demosthenes, speech 21, which is against Medias, that he accused the mother of a political rival of being a prostitute, of being a whore. That is really incredible in today's terms. So I am really thinking if there was a limit, or if there was some relative freedom in Athens to use such severe accusations, to make such severe accusations against your enemies. There was a legal process. Sima would like to tell more about that. There was a legal process of accusing someone of using invective in an extravagant way. But I'm not sure that legal process, the Rhetoric process, was indeed used in Athens, because I know that many scholars, like, for example, Michael Gagarin and Ed Harris, expressed disagreements about the validity of the stuff we have, about the hubris, graphi hubreus, about the hubris process, and if it covers cases of comic invective in the law court or in the theater, the comic theater. There is some friction between scholars, especially Alan Sommerstein and Stephen Halliwell, on the matter. They published 2 chapters in a volume edited by Ralph Rosen and Ineke Sluiter a couple of years ago, even a decade or more years ago. And they expressed disagreeing comments on that issue. But it is certainly a matter for further investigation. And I would like to invite the student, if she has any comments to make, to the conference we are planning to organize at the Academy of Athens. It is really a very challenging matter for us all to think. I'm afraid I don't have an answer, but I do have the same questions as the student has.
Thank you. Ivana, if you have any sort of reply, feel free to type it. Professor?
Just a short question for Andreas. Can you explain why, completely out of your topic, why do they say in American English hubris instead of hybris?
I don't know. I mean, I remember Michael Gagarin using the same pronunciation, hubris, and Ed Harris using the same pronunciation. Both are Americans. I didn't listen to that the way you said it in the second pronunciation. How did you say in the second way?
Hubris.
Hubris. I don't know. I always say hubris myself. It is perhaps because the Y is used in English in writing in the term in a transliterating way. Whereas we have upsilon in Greek.
Epsilon.
This is perhaps the reason, but I'm not sure.
Can you pronounce epsilon like E?
Yes, I pronounce it hubris, like keeping the upsilon that we have in Greek. Instead, if you say hybris, if you're using the Y in British and American English, then you may change your pronunciation. But it is strange that I listened to Michael Gagarin and Ed Harris pronouncing the term the right way. I mean, the way I'm pronouncing myself, hubris. Oh, that's another clever question, linguistically speaking.
Okay. Marko Došlić has a question now, and I might have a follow-up after that, but he's been waiting for a while. And maybe Peter wanted something after him, but Marko is first.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for a very interesting lecture. And my question would be, were there certain Attic orators that were more likely to use comic invective or were even known to use it more often, even if it was a rare occasion in the speeches, considering you did read a lot of the speeches? Were there certain orators that were never using it, and were there some that were more likely to use it, let's say? Thank you.
Well, that's another very interesting question. I'm happy I can offer an answer, because I asked about this issue many times at conferences, and I wasn't able to give an answer before investigating comic invective in private speeches as well. Yes, I found out that Aeschines, who wrote private speeches, was not using comic invective at all. And the same goes for Lysias. I mean, from the 34 speeches of Lysias that have come down to us in a textual form, I only found 2 instances in Lysias' one against Eratosthenes, on the murder of Eratosthenes, and in Lysias' 24 on the pension, where anyone can find instances of comic invective. So Lysias and Aeschines uses comic invective the least of all 10 Attic orators. Now, why this is happening, I do have some ideas incorporated in my article, and I said that there seems to be a personal distaste against using comic invective, but I cannot be sure about that. It may also be the case of private speeches that Aeschines wrote. You know that the speeches of Aeschines are mostly on inheritance topics, right? So it may not be compelling to use comic invective in inheritance or property speeches. Like, for example, whenever you are discussing about wills of dead people, whenever you're discussing about the fields that you are going to lose by your opponent, it may not be as compelling as it is in public cases or in other private cases to use comic invective. So yes, Aeschines and Lysias use comic invective much less than the other 10 Attic orators. That's another very interesting question. So Nina and Sima and Nina, you're doing an excellent job at the University of Belgrade in teaching these students how to think, because it is important. It is one thing to learn to read and write about academic stuff, and it is a completely different thing to have students who are able to use their mind. That's really impressive. I am deeply impressed. Thank you, Marco. Thank you very much indeed.
May I say just a word? It is not our, let's say, we didn't make them to think. That's a kind of, let's say, national attitude. I remember that Alan Watson was always impressed with our students when he comes to Belgrade, speaking that they're really thinking. So do not attribute this kind of nice, let's say,
quality of the students.
Exactly. Right? It is not, we are not guilty for that. It is their own.
Well, you're partners in crime. Both Nina and you are partners in crime. And I really enjoy having discussions with young students about matters of Attic oratory. I learned a lot from my students, and I learned a lot from the students at the University of Cyprus and here at the Academy of Athens, who are willing to read and discuss the ancient Greek stuff, especially the forensic speeches with me. So next time, I hope I will be able to come to the University of Belgrade myself and have a teaching session with Marco and with the other students. Thank you very much indeed. Very, very interesting questions.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see any hands, I don't see any chats.
I have.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Good evening to all of you. I want to ask one question. Were these speeches, public speeches, maybe sometimes directed to make fun of whole country system, some parts of it?
Interesting question. We do have epidictic speeches to do this job. In funerals, I mean, you may remember or you may have read Pericles' funeral oration, which is recorded by Thucydides in his book 2 of Histories, from section 34 onwards. We do have epidictic speeches where speakers are making references to others. I mean, you may remember that Pericles said that we Athenians are discussing matters extensively, and then we are making decisions, and we do have Spartans who are not able to exchange a few words, and if they do, they are afraid to make decisions. So in epidictic speeches, we do have this quality. We do have speakers attacking other city-states in Greece, in ancient Greece, but not so much in public speeches, apart from the 4 public speeches Demosthenes and Aeschines made to accuse each other of helping Philip and Great Alexander, the 2 kings of Macedon. So Demosthenes is speech 18 on the false embassy, on the crown, 19 on the false embassy, and Aeschines is speech 2 on the false embassy and speech 3 against Ctesiphon. These 4 speeches are used to accuse other city-states in ancient Greece, especially the kingdom of Macedon. The kingdom of Macedon. But the kingdom of Macedon was not recognized as a part of ancient Greece. So there's a different story there. You have an enemy which is presented, especially by Demosthenes, as being a foreign enemy, as being a barbaric enemy, like the Persians. So you don't have criticism of Greek cities there, you have criticism of foreign city-state. But yes, in principle, we do have epidictic orations, and in some cases also some public speeches. I remember, I think it was, oh my goodness, it was Demosthenes' speech 14 against the Rhodians, where Demosthenes presented the case that the Rhodians left the Athenian league of the Athenian alliance of city-states in Greece to declare independence, but then Demosthenes in that speech defended the Rhodians. So it is not criticism again. But yes, in principle, you can find public speeches which express negative sentiments against other Greek city-states. Another good question.
Thank you so much for your answer and for a beautiful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
So we have another question in the chat. Ivan Milekovic says, I am not a legal scholar, but rather an art historian, so I would like to ask something not completely connected to the subject. While speaking of art from Middle Ages onwards, art historians tend to attribute rhetoricism to it, or rather to claim that visual culture, art, had the same functions as rhetorics. Can this concept be claimed for ancient Greece as well? And if so, was there any element of comic invective in it?
Another very good question. You know, there is a term in Greek, ekphrasis, which means pictorial, vivid descriptions, and I wrote a magnificent paper on that issue, which was published by Classical Quarterly in 2015. What we can see in this very passage of Demosthenes, so Demosthenes 18, 262, it's a kind of visual description, right? You have Aeschines getting into the theater. You see him being pelted by figs and grapes and olives that he collects like a fruit seller. And you have the war, you have the description of the war. This is pictorial, this is lively in quality, right? You have words that conjure up images before your eyes. You can read and you can see at the same time. This is ekphrasis, as we say in Greek. And it is connected with art, with the realm of art. And it is important to see this quality being incorporated in all the passages that I have included in this presentation, wanting to discuss comic invective. You can see here another lively ekphrastic quality of the text. Demosthenes is presented crying. As to his tears, with a shrill voice, he asks you, where shall I find refugee men of Athens? Shut me out of public life and there's nowhere for me to fly. And you see this magnificent verb, anaptesomai. So you read the text and you can see the images being presented in front of your eyes. This is ekphrasis, and I like this term. There is another term that is used by rhetoricians in Athens, enargeia, which is very close to ekphrasis. There are some differences that I explained in my article, but these two terms effectively change passages into visual objects. So I do really like this question, because it was a question that I described both in my book, the one Sima has, in my dissertation, in my article, the first ever article I have published, and I do like very much. Well, thank you very much. Absolutely clever and fantastic question you asked.
Does anyone else have a question?
It's amazing how many, it's amazing how many people who are not legal experts have so clever questions to ask. It is really amazing, really amazing.
That means your lecture was very inspiring. And I have one question.
Yes.
As a follow-up to the part where you mentioned we can't imagine today someone speaking out and accusing someone's mother of being a prostitute and so on. But is that maybe related to a different relevance of the fact in Athens and now? Because today, if you accuse someone's mother of being a prostitute, that might be an attack on her morality, regarding at least the majority of the population, but it wouldn't have any legal consequences. But if you accuse someone's mother of being a prostitute in Athens, thus having had relations with who knows how many and which men, then you might question who his father was, and then maybe if his father wasn't his mother's husband, then maybe he's not an Athenian citizen.
That's a very good reasoning, a very good way of thinking, but there is also the opportunity, the possibility, better say, the possibility the woman to be a widow. So having no man, no kurios, no parents, no father, no husband, no adult brother. So how can you cope with this issue here? I mean, there is certainly a relationship with the father, the way you describe it, Nina, that's absolutely clear. But if you are right, then Demosthenes had to be in a very difficult position to call the mother of his opponent a prostitute. So why did he do so? I mean, he was very experienced when he was writing speech 21 against Medias. I cannot imagine that he was not aware that he would have been in troubles when he decided to call the mother of his opponent a prostitute. So why did he do so? I do really agree with the way of thinking, and I do really like that suggestion you're making, but I do have problems to accept that Demosthenes was so careless of making such a horrific accusation if he knew that he would have been in troubles. So it is the same about using many other techniques we cannot really understand. I mean, comic invective, whenever you say that your opponent is effeminate, he can say a few things about you, and he can also use other data you don't want to be used in the court. I mean, for example, when Demosthenes accuses Aeschines of having fought no fight to protect Athens, Aeschines got into the law court with psiphisma, with the resolution of the Greek, of the Athenian demos, in which Demosthenes was accused of being a coward, of being a draft dodger, of not going to the military. Okay, and that was a very important accusation to be trotted out against someone. So I'm not sure why Demosthenes chose to accuse Aeschines of not being a patriot when he had so many to hide. Okay, so these are very intriguing questions, but I'm afraid I don't have any satisfactory answers to suggest. I hope the conference that will be organized in Athens will give us more food for thought and some answers that we need. But yeah, I do like the way of thinking. I do have some troubles to accept that Aeschines was, Demosthenes in that particular case of accusing the mother of someone of being a prostitute was so careless to use a problematic technique. There should be something in the code of honor and decency, timi in Greek, and kleos, that is not pretty clear to us. Anything else?
Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, it just remains to thank our guest once more for his lecture. It was wonderful. You saw yourself from the discussion how inspiring it was. So we'll be very happy to have you soon in Belgrade for real, live, as soon as the pandemic allows. And if it doesn't allow it soon, then maybe we'll see you some other time online.
It will be my pleasure to come back as a person to see great friends and so great students. Thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to discuss comic invective with your colleagues and students. I have to say once again that I am deeply impressed by your students, and this is quite wonderful to have such clever students. And being able to communicate with them. Sima, I would like to thank you for the invitation you submitted to me, you sent me. It was wonderful to see you again and see Nina. And I hope we will do it again sometime in the future.
Dear Andreas, you're always very welcome to Belgrade. And we hope that the next visit will be really the live visit. But I have two major feelings or impressions after your lecture. First of all, our students are enriched not only with this particular point that you raised today, but it was basically a lecture in rhetoric, in many notions of rhetoric, and I'm so happy that you share all your wide knowledge with our students. It was really something great, and we really enjoyed your lecture. And the second impression is that it seems to me that online communication is sometimes even better, and I would say it is even more provoking. I have feeling that maybe students are not so shy on inline meetings than when we have live connections in the amphitheater in the Belgrade Faculty of Law. I remember very well the lectures when we had just, complete silence in the audience. Nobody wanted to comment, but I'm really happy with the students as well. And this is my third most important impression. But above all, thanks, Andreas. It was marvelous lecture, and it is something that we can be proud with, that you are our member. You can be with us in the next sessions of Forum Romanum, particularly those in English. We are going to have our colleague from Denver, Professor Castellani. So you can join us if you want. It is 2 weeks from now, if I remember well. So thank you again, and come again. It will be our pleasure. Thanks to all our students who are really marvelous. It is a great honor to be professor of such a great corpus of the students. Thanks again. Welcome. See you in Belgrade.
Thank you very much indeed, and bye-bye from Athens.
Bye to all.
Thank you. Goodbye.